I would like to make you aware that this meeting is being live streamed via the Council's YouTube channel. Please ensure that any mobile phones are switched to silent. So welcome to those who are watching at home. I would also like to outline some housekeeping arrangements. If you wish to speak, please indicate to do so to myself. To enable your microphone, please press the middle button, which will turn green, and the microphone will light up red at the top to indicate that this has happened. Please remember to press the middle button when you have finished speaking, as it is particularly important that all members use their microphone so that the audio can be picked up through the live stream. In the event of a fire alarm sounding during the meeting, please stand and follow the meeting administrator to the evacuation point outside of the building. Firstly, do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from councillors Corney, Davenport Ray, Dew, Gardner and Jordan, Chair.
Thank you very much. We will move on to item 1 on the agenda. And we'll be approving the minutes as a correct record. Are we all in agreement with that? Okay, we will move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is members' interests. Are there any interests that need to be declared? Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. I have to declare a semi-interest on 3A, only from a perspective that I was contacted by the local MP who wanted to discuss some matters which I didn't discuss with him, and advised that they could read, or he could read, the reason as to why it was deferred.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members' interests? No. Then we will be moving on to item 3A, which is an item which has been deferred. So, oh yes, before we move on to 3A, I will just put to you that item 3C has been withdrawn, and are members willing to decide not to make a decision this evening on that particular item as it has been withdrawn? Oh, 4C, yes. So that's the Ellington application. Are we all agreed that we're happy to not make a decision on that? Thank you. Okay, so item 3A is an item that has been deferred, and we looked at this last month. I just need to ask a question first. Did anyone receive an email regarding the application that we're looking at today?
Yes.
Okay, so regarding this particular one, as this correspondence has not been considered by the planning officer, it needs to be disregarded when making your decision on this particular application. Okay, just to make you aware of that email that has been sent to councillors. So I will bring this item 3A and our planning officer, Lewis Tomlinson, will present them to us.
Thank you, Chair. So the site is Manor Farm, Ball Lane, Broughton, for the erection of a grain store, associated hard standing and new vehicle access. This application is referred to the committee because the officer recommendation of refusal is contrary to the parish council recommendation of approval. Members may recall that this application was considered at last month's committee. Officers recommended refusal for 3 reasons: visual impact, highway safety and drainage. Members resolved to defer the item to allow for the additional/revised information in relation to refusal reasons 2 and 3 to be consulted on. The applicant resent this information, which included an updated site plan, discussion with highways about vehicle movements, a drainage strategy, updated planning statement and covering letter following the committee meeting. This has all been consulted on. Both the Highway Authority and the lead local flood authority have removed their objections. Reason 1 has been amended to remove reference to the lack of justification for its citing and removal of the relevant parts of LP19 in relation to that. The rest of the refusal reason remains. Reason 2 is removed, and reason 3 is removed. Members should also note paragraph 7.29 of the officer report, which addresses the previously incorrect advice officers gave members regarding permitted development. Officers suggested that the proposed development was not permitted development because of the size of the building. This was incorrect. Permitted development rights were updated to new thresholds of 1,000 square metres for agricultural buildings. The council has previously advised the applicant that because the site was in 3 kilometres of an operational airfield and exceeded the height limitations, the development was not considered to be permitted development and therefore required planning permission, leading to the application in front of you tonight. So I'll just go back through the presentation that we did last month, just to make sure members are up to speed on the application. So the application was submitted by 42 Farming Limited Liability Partnership in respect to their site known as Manor Farm. The farm itself is accessed off Ball Lane, but the site for development is located approximately 500 metres southeast of Broughton Lane, close to its junction with Causeway Roads. In terms of constraints, the site is classified as Grade 3 agricultural land and falls within the Central Claylands Landscape Character Area. Aspects of this character area include gentle, undulating, arable farmland and large-scale field pattern with few hedgerows or hedgerow trees, giving rise to predominantly open landscape. The boundary of Broughton Conservation Area lies approximately 100 metres to the northwest. Whilst there are a number of listed buildings, mainly Grade 2, within the village itself, the closest listed building is approximately 275 metres northwest of the site. There's no protected trees in the immediate vicinity. The site is within flood zone 1 and has a generally low risk of flooding from general sources. So you can see the site outlined in black on the screen in front of you. You can see the village up to northwest. You can see the listed buildings in pink. And then the shading that you can slightly see in pink is the conservation area. That's an aerial image of the site. So this is a photo. So you got the access is just to the left of that tree. You can notice mostly flat, little kind of hedgerow kind of screening. Wider view of the landscape and sighting of the building. This is a view from southeast looking towards the junction of Broughton Lane / Causeway Road. Application sites to the right, and you can see the hedgerows clearly visible. View southeast along Broughton Lane. Access will be to the foreground of the photo, and the application sites to the left. And this is just a photo of the wider landscape area in the vicinity of the application site to the north. So you can see outlined in red the proposed building. You can see a blue line because that's land within the ownership of the applicant. So the proposal, this application seeks permission for the erection of a grain store with associated hard-standing new vehicular access. It's 30 metres wide, 24 metres deep, with an eaves of 7 metres and a ridge of 9.8 metres. So that's the site plan in front of you. Just note that the red line you can see just goes around the hard landscaping. There's attenuation pond and landscaping shown outside of the red line, but within the blue line. This is the floor plan, roof plan, side elevation, I guess back, rear elevation, side elevation, and then front elevation. And then this is just a street scene with landscaping. So the officer recommendation is refusal for the following reason. The proposed development by virtue of its siting and scale would be visually harmful to the character and appearance of the surrounding countryside location. The The proposal is therefore contrary to policies LP 10B, LP 11, LP 12, LP 19 Part H. Further, it's contrary to paragraphs 85 and 174B of the NPPF and parts B2, C1, L1, L2, L3, that's I1, I2, I3 of the National Design Guides. Just add a bit more to that. So officers consider that the proposed building, by virtue of its site and scale and design, be very imposing and visually harmful addition to the landscape, an exposed and presently large, unspoilt countryside location, be highly visible from Broughton Lane, one of the main routes and approaches into the village from the A141 to the east. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to our speakers for this particular item. Our first speaker for this particular item is Councillor Michael O'Donovan for Broughton Parish Council. Welcome. When you're ready, you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. And if you want to press your middle button, and then you'll be able to be heard.
That one. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and members of the council. I was here at the last committee meeting here, and I continue to speak of support from the Broughton Parish Council for the approval of the installation of a new grain store and manor farm in Broughton, despite the visual impact it may have on surrounding countryside. Some weeks ago, I attended the HDC seminar to discuss the new local plan to 2050. That's not the current one, that's the future one. The representatives of the planning department stressed the importance of local opinion from those who live in small rural villages. Words were used to the effect that those who live in such villages will know their, quote, patch better than those who do not. Local comment would be most welcome. As concerned and conscientious residents of Broughton Village, the Parish Council understands the importance of maintaining the aesthetic appeal and natural beauty of our local landscape. However, we believe that the proposed grain store project outweighs the visual concerns as at least the worst option, considering the benefits it will offer to our community and to the local agricultural industry. The grain store will enhance the capacity for storing locally produced grain, help to reduce wastage during peak harvesting times, and have a positive impact on the economic growth and stability of Broughton Village. I urge the District Council to give due consideration to the approval of this grain store and support the members of Broughton Parish Council in making their recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there any questions from members for this particular speaker? There are no questions, so thank you very much for addressing us today. Our next speaker is Councillor Charlotte Lowe. Welcome, Councillor Lowe, and you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee.
Thank you. As I was here as well last month, again, just in support of the application, it's a rural village, rural business. The barn is of the more modern standard size. I don't think it's in excess. And it's going to house all the crops which unfortunately can't be housed in the existing barn. And with the inclemental British weather we have, crops can be ruined, which will obviously have an impact on the business. Yeah, I think that's yeah, and just in the local plan, it does say that we support rural economies and traditional agriculture. And it's, what am I trying to say? Sorry. It's just, it seems ridiculous to object to it. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lowe. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? There are no questions, so thank you very much, Councillor Lowe. We have down an objector to this particular application. I'm not sure if they're here, but Dr. Charlene Badger? No. So we will move on to our next speaker, which is the agent, which is Victoria Gray. Oh, and the agent, who is Andrew Middleditch. Thank you for joining us. You have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. And when you're ready, please press the middle button.
Thank you. We're pleased to note this application is being represented to committee with confirmation that concerns relating to highways and drainage have been resolved, but disappointed that your officers maintain objection on the grounds of landscape impact. The characteristics of the site are as follows. It involves predominantly Grade 3 land. It is some distance from the nearest listed building and conservation area. It does not impact upon protected trees. It is not in an area of flood risk. There is no highways objection. There is no drainage objection. It does not affect a protected site of landscape or conservation value, and the operational need for the siting has been proven as acknowledged by your officers. This is not an unusual building. It is a typical modern grain store. It is not overly large. It is large enough to meet the needs of the holding. It is a building typical of the countryside and typical of the Claylands landscape within which it will be set. It is a building which would have been approved under permitted development had it not been within 3 kilometres of Witton Airfield. Furthermore, the applicants have carefully selected a site which is either wholly or partially screened from most public views by immediate or middle distance landscaping. It does not sit on the skyline and it is not visible from the village. Despite all of this, and despite acknowledging the need for the building, your officers are recommending that this application be refused, and in doing so, they are condemning this business to certain failure, as it will be unable to meet its own essential farming needs within the competitive industry, which is driving many smaller family farming firms out of business. Such an approach is contrary to your own policies, which seek to support established rural businesses. If I could ask Victoria to speak as well.
Thank you. I sit here today as my sister did only a matter of weeks ago, asking for your support with this application. This grain store is integral to the future proofing of our family farming business. We have carefully considered its central location within the farm, minimalising its visual impact with natural cover and, importantly, removing heavy traffic from the village. We have addressed the planning officer's concerns, exceeding normal requirements, and embraced expert advice, especially regarding landscaping. We are an established rural business trying to secure our future with standard farming tools and practices. We have conformed with the spirit and material of the national and local planning policy. We kindly request your consideration and backing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for addressing us. Are there any questions for these particular speakers? There are no questions, so thank you very much for coming to speak with us today. Okay, that is all the speakers for this particular item. We will now move on to questions of clarification for our planning officers. Are there any questions of clarification for our planning officer? Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. It's one actually I didn't pick up, although we didn't get much debate on the last one. I'm assuming, and one shouldn't assume, that the airfield we're talking about is Witton, which is a non-operational. I know it's still classified. Okay, that is the one that's fine. I wasn't sure whether there was another one, which I thought I knew most airfields around there, thinking it would possibly another one. Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions of clarification for the planning officer? There are no questions, so we will move on to the discussion on this particular application. Can I just remind members that you can speak once about this particular application unless you have an extra point that is different that you would like to add to the conversation. Who would like to start the debate? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for bringing this back so quickly, which I know it's quite unusual. This is a balance, as I see it. Do the benefits outweigh the harm? That's what I'm working out or trying to work out in my mind. And looking at the whole village, I went there today. I looked, which I don't know whether many of you have been, to look at the old original manor farm down Ball Lane. It's very narrow entrance, probably a couple 100 yards long. You will see there a barn which is overflowing with grain. Obviously, they couldn't hold all they'd got in there. When you're looking at, LP10 and could it be built there? No. It's the lane is too narrow. It's not acceptable. It would create a problem in the village. There's lots of things that I've jotted down. I think the benefits outweigh the harm, as do the parish council. There'd be less heavy traffic going through the village. If you conditioned it that at a traffic route coming from the 141, you can't do a condition on that, or a traffic management plan. Can you do a traffic management plan?
I'll bring in our chief planning officer.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a point of clarification, we would not be able to impose enforceable conditions on the traffic routing to and from farm.
I mean, that would be the obvious way in my mind, because if you go through the village and out the other way, it goes into a single track. So you wouldn't want a lot of heavy traffic coming into the village, I don't feel, from that side. So that's a benefit to the village. It helps the rural economy, as we heard. It helps the farm remain productive and profitable. As you know, farms are getting bigger. So it's possible that this farm would have more land added to it. Broughton's a very unusual village that there are about 6 farms around in itself. There's 2 right in the middle near the church. And I spoke to someone there today that says the lorries have to back up that road to get into the farm. It makes the farm viable if this building's put up. I don't know, as I say, if you went up and had a look at the original farm, you'd realise that, you couldn't put a building on that site. So what's the farmer to do? We're saying, or the officers are saying, it's visually obtrusive. I've been in farming, too many years now, probably. But every building a farmer's ever put up, in my mind, it's always had a visual impact. There is no other way you can do it. If you need a new barn, the height you need today, it is going to be having a visual impact. And as the parish council we've heard, they wish to approve this and disregard the fact of the visual impact. So when we weigh this up with a balance, I don't feel within a very short time it will not have a visual harmful effect. So I'm erring on the side of approving this.
it makes the farm viable, which where else can they go? I've looked round Broughton. There's nowhere else really around that area without going into the village and creating disturbance in there with heavy goods vehicles that you can go. So these are the benefits that outweigh the harm, I feel. So I go along with the parish council and I will accept there may be a slight visual harm initially. And I would go as far as saying I would like to propose that we accept the application.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Is there anyone else? Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I've managed to get my microphone on now. Thank you, Chair. I think this is a difficult one because yet barns in themselves can be nice. Most of them are just functional buildings, aren't they? So they're not built to be nice. Some of the old ones are very nice, and maybe in the future, some of the ones that are now built will equally look nice. But it is I've looked at it from a functionality side, and I've been listening to Councillor Butler over there talking about the balance, and it is a balance of what's right and what's wrong. And I kept looking at 7.29 again, which talked about the other matters. And the way I read it, it says it's permitted development if it wasn't for the fact that there's an airfield within 3 kilometres. I'm not going to discuss whether the airfield is live or not live because it's clearly still stated as alive. But when it runs east-west, but also I'm assuming we haven't, because I haven't seen anywhere that Witton have complained or said anything about a 7-metre high building, which is quite a way off. So technically, it almost looks as if it's not permitted development because of a minor aspect. But looking at the other things, I think it is a large building. I think it's a tall building. And now I understand more as to why it's of its height. And now that we've gone through the other aspect of seeing that highways have not got such an issue and the other things have disappeared, I mean, it is down to really now its siting. And I think, listening to Councillor Butler again, farm buildings technically always going to be big buildings and in some people's perspective in the wrong place, but they have to be there for functionality as well. And I'm also minded, in fact, no, I'm minded to approve as well. So I would actually second Councillor Butler's proposal of approval on this one, despite the fact I do agree it's in an area that has some concern, not close to the conservation area enough, in my view, to worry that. But I think from a balanced perspective, from a farming perspective, from a rural economy perspective, I think that balance is slightly overweighed against some of the visual impacts that it will have, which I'm sure eventually will blend in and be another farm building. So I'm happy to second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Niche. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're in danger of going on to non-planning matters with some of this. I mean, I know the comments about farming, and I don't doubt Councillor Butler's credentials in that area, but I think we need to focus really on the key problem here, which remains at 7.13. If you read it, the Council's Landscape Officer objects to the application as a proposed development would not integrate the building into the landscape successfully. And that is the key sentence in my view. We know that farm buildings are often unattractive, incongruous, etc., but they would need to be integrated into the landscape. And this would introduce a large building with an industrial character into a deeply rural landscape. And I think we've all on this panel have been to Broughton and looked at the landscape, and it's clear this doesn't comply with that. And also I pick up on the comments that a lot of the landscaping would actually need to be, or would be outside the boundaries of this development, wouldn't be under the ownership of the applicants. And it is a very imposing and visually harmful addition to the landscape. So for those reasons, I would support the officer recommendation here to reject the application. Thank you.
So are you proposing refusal?
Yes, yeah.
Councillor Gorson.
Thank you, Chair.
like Councillor Butler and Councillor Nish, I looked at this and I believe that the applicant has made great store in trying to make this into an area that is not too unsightly. I think there is a possibility of more screening off the Broughton Road would most likely help. There is the bund going around the back. There's extra planting to try and mitigate and try and hide this needed building. But another reason I come from is that where I live, the village has been growing around the farm. And so we now get more complaints of heavy lorries going through the village and causing problems. And so to that mind, I'm like-minded to agree with this one as well, with Councillor Butler to go with for approval on this. They've gone with everything, looking for the, I think, olive green on the main part of the building to goosewing grey to try and make it blend into the countryside. And I believe that that they're doing as much as they can. Whether we can ask for a bit more screening on the Broughton Road to make it a little bit less visible, I think that is the only thing I would most likely add to any proposal on this, to condition extra screening on the front. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor McAdam.
Thank you, Chair. RAF Whitton Airfield is not operational, so that's one thing. Having looked at the site myself twice now, and also into the village where the old farm buildings are, I agree with what's been said. I do believe that it is a matter of balance. I hate to see countryside despoiled, but at the same time, I can see that there is a need for this, and it's whether one outweighs the other. So I'm actually inclined to agree that the application should go ahead. Thank you.
At this particular point, I'd like to bring in our Chief Planning Officer just to clarify the status of the airfield.
Thank you, Chair. For the avoidance of doubt, Whitton Airfield is still classed as an operational airfield due to the fact that more recently Magpass were operating from the airfield. So while light aircraft themselves may have ceased, the helicopter, the medical helicopter, has been operating out of there. We do know that they have moved to Alconbury Weald. However, that does not in itself mean that the airfield is redundant.
Thank you. Councillor Tevlin.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm minded to support a proposal for this application because I think, yes, it's a difficult balance, and yes, we can see from the officer's recommendations about the issues of conservation. I think Councillor Gorson's point of having extra social shielding there would be a good opportunity. But I think the balance raised in the LP19 and the rural economy and looking to the future, I just think the benefits outweigh. And therefore I'm minded to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tevlin. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues. It's been interesting reflecting on contributions colleagues have made about this one. I think we're all agreeing it is difficult. It's not as straightforward as some we see. There is no doubt in my mind that we've got an applicant meeting definitions as rural business, that they've got a legitimate need to be in the countryside in the language of our plan, and I don't think there's any doubt with the further information as is set out in the report compared with what we saw previously, that the operational need to be in the countryside is met. I think Councillor Nish made some characteristically persuasive observations about balance and considering the the wider circumstances of the application and what might be reasonable. I would just underline that as we might think, sadly, so many other contexts as well, we aren't entitled to substitute our judgment about common sense in place of the policy framework in front of us. We're working, trying to apply the policy framework with common sense. And I think the example the context we've heard, that while it seems in many ways surprising or perverse that the impact of an airfield might have an impact on permitted development rights, the reality is we have to work in a context in which there are no permitted development rights because of that classification. So we are trying to work with the policy in front of us. I think the sections in the report on the principle, as well as then the design and visual impact of development. So, Councillor Sanderson drew attention to 7.13 within the latter, but there are helpful paragraphs from 7.2 onwards. I think they do discuss the difficulty here. For me, policy 10B is an inherently subjective judgment call. So if I'm browsing through my well-thumbed policy, the virtually thumbed version of the local plan, so recognizing the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside is clearly a difficult judgment call as to what meets that. But in LP 19, which Councillor Tevlin I think referenced as well, we are asked to apply a policy that says that a proposal will only be supported where it fulfills, among other things, paragraph H, the scale and character and siting of the proposal will not have a detrimental impact on its immediate surroundings and the wider landscape. Now, I think we've heard from comments around the table this evening, I think a recognition that it will have an impact, and there's an attempt to I think give greater weight to other policies. I'm inferring people haven't navigated explicitly the policy interpretation sort of track proposed, but other policies are being given greater weight to set that aside. But I think it is a clear and bold policy, you might say, referencing back to the parish council's comments initially about the importance of local involvement in setting planning policy. We absolutely agree, and that is why it's important to have input so that we've got the right levels of nuance in our policy framework. But we're working with what's in front of us, and I struggle to see that LP 19 H can be said to be met despite the context we've heard, and particularly in case of a grey and difficulty here. I do think it's reasonable to be led by the advice we've got from our landscape officer, which Councillor Sanderson flagged earlier. So for me, it's difficult, but I think both the principle of development and the design is hard to reconcile with our policy framework. Particularly, I think LP 19 is relevant in my thinking. I don't see how that's fully addressed by the proposal of accepting this. So I'd be seconding Councillor Sanderson's proposal for rejection, I think, on balance, but certainly interested to hear any final contributions from colleagues who haven't already spoken. Thank you.
Councillor Brayton.
Thank you, Chair. This is a farm in a rural area. Rural areas mean farm buildings. Wherever you put it in that area, it's going to be noticeable. I think, as my fellow councillor said, if with screening at the front and the sides, perhaps it will take away the visual thing. I'm minded to accept this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brereton. As a member of this committee, I'd like to raise some points as well on how I'm thinking. As a committee, we come here and we have particular policies that we look at to make decisions. And it's been brought to our attention that the size and the character of the building is not for this particular area. Something that interested me was that our landscape officer mentions the Huntingdonshire Landscape and Townscape supplement for our planning. And because I had a look at that, because it came to, it was assessed last year in 2022 and is approved, there is actually a picture of Broughton Lane within that particular document saying that it is a typical area for Claylands with low hedges, open outlooks. And I just can't see how having a large agricultural barn is recognising the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. And also within the national planning framework, it also says that we should be protecting and enhancing our valued landscapes and sites of biodiversity. So with this particular document that has already is only a year old, and also with the NPPF only being 2 years old, I'm minded to agree with Councillor Sanderson and Wakeford and to refuse this particular application. Are there any other councillors that wish to speak on this particular application? There are no other members that would like to make an opinion. Therefore, we will go to Councillor. Councillor Butler has proposed approval for this particular application. Councillor Butler, can I ask whether you want to put any conditions on this particular approval? Because I know that some members were suggesting that having extra screening.
Well, I'll be guided by the officers. I mean, obviously, screening will be a benefit. Yes, it will benefit from extra screening. I don't think there's anything we can say about the road network. I mean, the County Council of Highways have agreed with all that. So no, other than whatever the officers wish to bring in as their conditions, which are standard.
I'd like to bring in our planning officers to see whether there are any conditions that we can put on this.
Can we condition it that we put in extra, I'm still on, extra edging or taller trees to try and lessen the impact of it anyway?
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Yes, you can if members are minded to support this, as long as you're able to provide material planning reasons as to why. We can look at the conditions. We can look at landscaping, and I would encourage you to think about securing the use of the building for agricultural use only and not for any other use that could apply under permitted development. So in advance of the meeting, Mr. Tomlinson has been looking through potential conditions and has a list and is happy to take you through those. But landscaping, absolutely, we can include.
So, okay. Right, so the proposal was to approve this application. All those in favour of approval, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And any abstentions? There are no abstentions, so that has been approved. I'd like to bring in the planning officer to see whether there are any conditions that can be added to this proposal.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, so we've got conditions regarding obviously time consent, which is the standard one, start within 3 years. Drawings, which are the ones that you've seen in the presentation. We've got a landscaping condition in there. That's just a generic one in there, but we can insert a line that's kind of more relevant to this site to capture the extra screening on Broughton Lane. We've got a drainage scheme, which is recommended by the Lead Local Flood Authority. Drainage during construction, also recommended by them. The next set of conditions, all recommended by the Highway Authority, quite standard. So you've got ones that ensure that gates are set back 8 metres from the highway. Just to make sure that the vehicle can pull off the highway without blocking it. While it waits for a gate to open, if there are gates inserted. You've got then conditions around the access width, construction, spec, and drainage. You've got a condition around the parking, turn, and loading area during construction and also the lifetime of the development. You've got the visibility displays and radius curbs. And then just one that was added on at the end of that discussion, agricultural use, permitted development restriction. I think that captures everyone. Obviously, there was a discussion around the traffic management plan. Clara came back on that. That's not something we can enforce against. Therefore, we shouldn't apply conditions that we know don't meet the 6 tests.
Thank you very much, planning officer. Can I put a question to the members? Are we happy to delegate the final decision for conditions to the chief planning officer on this particular application? All those in favour, can you raise your hands?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
So that has been carried. So the final decision for conditions will be delegated to the chief planning officer. Right, we will just take a quick break while we'll just wait for some members to return. which is a planning application in Bythorn and Keystone. So we have got our planning officer, Kevin Simpson, here to present that to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So, yes, this is item 4A, which is pages 39 to 78 of the reports pack. And it's the application for full planning permission for the retention of an existing detached 4-bedroom dwelling, including the extensions at Full House, Tollbar Lane, Keyston. The application is brought to Development Management Committee because the officer recommendation of approval differs from that of the Parish Council, and it has also been called into committee by the local ward member, Councillor Gray. So before we go through the slides in totality, I just want to go through some brief correspondence and details with you. So the site is within the Keystone Conservation Area and the setting of a Grade 2 listed building, and there are other listed buildings in the vicinity. There's a varied planning history associated with the site from 2004, and the dwelling was approved in 2005 under reference number 2000 under a 2004 planning application, along with works to Thatches, which is the Grade 2 listed building to the front. So whilst, as I will establish as I go through, and as you'll know from the report, the building hasn't been built as per the plans that were approved, the key matter for consideration is that the principle of a dwelling has already been established on that site and could be developed there. Further to that, the local planning authority issued a certificate of lawful development in 2016, which accepted that the permission had been implemented because works approved had been under the 2004 application had been undertaken to Thatches, so we were able to issue that certificate of lawful development. The dwelling as built does not accord with the approved plans, and so this application you see before you follows engagement with enforcement officers. It's important to note that as per the details in the officer report, there have been some issues on the part of the local planning authority throughout the lifetime of the, I want to say application, but since it was originally passed. So as you will see when I go through the slides shortly, the elevations that were originally approved are incorrectly annotated. Permitted development rights were not removed from the permission. Therefore, the dwelling could be extended in a similar way to the plans you're going to see before you with no requirement for planning permission. And I will come on to that in more detail as we progress. There's been an indication that conditional information may have been submitted to us with the conditions that were on the original plans, but there is no record of this. And the materials that were discharged, again, which you will see in the slides, went through and there was no engagement with the conservation team at that time. And the information that was approved was limited to a materials schedule, so that there were no physical samples provided. Equally, the permission is of its time. It was issued in 2004, and it didn't require physical samples to be submitted in a similar way to what we might consider now in a location such as this. So the Parish Council have been consulted, and they were reconsulted upon the submission of further details, mainly relating to the flood matters. And they maintain objections on grounds of flood risk, the effect on the listed building and the conservation area, the design, appearance and materials, the impact on residential amenity and impact on trees. We have consulted other internal and external consultees. So our trees and landscapes officer have got no objection subject to conditions. The Environment Agency have advised that it's not within their remit because of the scale of the development, and so there was no comment. The lead local flood authority have no objections subject to conditions. Anglian Water have not made any comment. Historic England have stated that they've got no comments to make. They did point out that that shouldn't be taken as a comment on the merits on the application, but one would consider that if they felt there was severe harm, they would have provided comments to us on that matter. And as you've seen from the reports, there is a conservation, from HDC's conservation team, there is a conservation objection that remains. Further to that, we've received 20 objections from 7 different dwellings in the vicinity. Some of these are following repeat consultations on the additional information that was received and that has been provided during the lifetime of the application. And these broadly relate to the development, the effect of the development on the character of the area due to its size, design and appearance, harmful to the historic character, harmful to designated heritage assets, the development not being in accordance with the previously approved plans, impacts on residential amenity, the materials being inconsistent with an earlier approval, the adverse impact on the landscape, flood risk, that the approval could set a precedent for people to act outside of regulations, incorrect details that were considered to have been submitted, impact and destruction of trees on the site, the quality of the build, increased ground levels, and considered misleading entries as part of the submission. So I'll now go through the individual slides with you. So the site that you see before you is the application site. You can see that hatched in black with the listed buildings surrounding it in pink, and then the conservation area in the paler pink surrounding. Next slide, please. So that's an aerial view of the site, obviously taken before the dwelling was built there. So that shows the ground floor plan of the original approval that came to us in 2004 and was approved in 2005. A key thing to note when looking at that plan is the location of the dwelling in relation to thatches to the front there, and the separation distance between the two dwellings there that my colleague's pointing out there. And the next slide, please. So that's the current block plan showing the layout of the dwelling as it stands at the moment. You note it is still set back in a similar position from Tollbar Lane as was originally approved. And you can still see there is a separation to thatches, although the rear extension, which I will discuss in further detail shortly, obviously removes that visual separation between the two. Next slide, please. So this shows the current ground floor plan of the property as built. Next slide, please. And that shows the first floor plan as approved under the 2004 application. And again, key thing to note there, I think, is the location of habitable rooms, the location of the bedroom window in the rear there. When I've discussed residential amenity impacts in the officer report, the location and siting of windows is quite similar, and the rooms that they're serving. Next slide, please. So that shows the first floor plan as is currently in place, the dwelling as built, and you can see the additional extensions there. This is the original elevations that were approved. So you can see when I refer to them being incorrectly annotated, the east and west elevations are confused there. So the top image is actually the west elevation. So that's showing the rear of the property as approved, and then thatches on the right-hand side of the picture. And then the west elevation is actually the east elevation, with thatches on the left-hand side adjacent to Tollbar Lane as it exists. Next slide, please. So these are the current elevations as the dwelling that's been built. So you can see we have still got some aspects of the original detailing in there. I've detailed in the officer report the differences in scale, but you can see you've still got the contouring, the reduced ridge heights. So there is some familiarity with the original plans that were proposed. Okay, so that's a view of the rear elevation, so the west elevation. You can see the single-story extension in place, and the side extension that's also now part of the development. And that's the north elevation, so that's facing away from Tollbar Lane. There's no view of that from any public viewpoint. And then this is the southern elevation, so that's what's visible from Tollbar Lane, and that's the single-story rear extension you can see on the left of the picture there. Okay, so this isn't the clearest picture, but it's the best that I could achieve with the support of a technical officer. So this shows the approved plans overlaid with the plans as built. So you can see the original layout, and you can just see what's been added in terms of the rear extension there and the side extensions in comparison with what the original approval was. And next slide, please. And similar with the elevations, so you can see what was originally approved. As I say, apologies, I know it's not the clearest, but it just gives you an indication as to what the original approval was and the differences in scale. Next slide, please. So this shows the materials that were approved under the discharge of conditions application in 2020. So these are what were submitted to us. As I say, the original permission didn't request that physical samples were provided. That's what's submitted, and that was the document that was approved. And next slide, please. And that shows the materials that have been put onto the property as it stands at the present. So you can see there are some minor variances, but equally the condition didn't state that they had to remain as approved. There are no specification details as to the type of bricks, the type of roofing materials to be used, which, as I say, on a permission that you were granting in a similar location now, you would likely request that sort of detail. So just coming back to the permitted development rights in terms of the extensions, I've looked back at what I can find regarding the 2005 legislation, and it's similar to what is applicable now. Ultimately, people could erect a single-storey rear extension on the back of their home under permitted development rights without the need to apply for planning permission. And similarly, they could erect a single-storey extension to the side as well under the same regulations. So at present, and bearing in mind that because the permitted development rights weren't removed, those still exist now under the current legislation. So regardless of what the legislation was in 2004, 2005, because those rights are there, that work could be carried out. So, for example, a householder in a detached dwelling could extend by a 4-metre depth. The neighbour consultation scheme doesn't apply under this application because it is on designated land. The neighbour consultation scheme is where people can extend at a much greater degree at single-storey level, and an application comes into the local planning authority, and then we consult neighbours. But at present, what they would be limited to, they could extend at a depth of 4 metres with an overall height of 4 metres, and the eaves would be limited to 3 metres within 2 metres of any boundary. So what you see before you could have been added under permitted development rights. And similar in terms of side extensions, a householder is permitted to extend at the side at single-storey level, provided that the side elevation does not front a highway, as long as it doesn't create an extension of more than half the width of the original house. And again, the height limits are up to 4 metres, and in which case the material should match. So what's that saying there is you could extend to the side in a similar way to has been done to the northern elevation, but because the southern elevation fronts the highway, you couldn't have an extension on that elevation, basically. So just moving on to the photograph. So that's the view of the rear of the property from the garden of Thatches, and you can see the rear extension I was just discussing there. The next slide, please. And again, that's the view of the extension from the rear garden of the property. And that's a view from Tollbar Lane. So you've got Thatches on your left-hand side there, and you can see the elevational drawing that you've just seen. So that's the east elevation of the dwelling looking onto Tollbar Lane, and you can see the degree of separation set back from the road there, and the contouring, the reduced ridge heights, the setback on the principal elevation that I referred to earlier. That's a view of the northern elevation, again away from the road. So that's another view of Thatches from the garden area of Full House, and again having regard to the position of the original approval, which is extant and was further secured under the certificate of lawfulness that was approved in 2016. Next slide, please. So this is just to give you an indication as to what the actual views are given its setback as you come along Tollbar Lane. So this is if you were travelling west along Tollbar Lane. You've got Winchester House there to the right, and you can see that there's no visibility of the dwelling. Next slide, please. So this is where it becomes clearer in view. So as you travel further west, naturally, as you're coming along the entrance, you can see the name of the house on the right-hand side there, and the view of Thatches on the left. And next slide, please. So this is the opposite direction. So this is travelling east. So you can see you've got Thatches there obscuring the view of it immediately, so anybody passing along the road wouldn't have that immediate view of the dwelling. And then the next slide, please. And then that's just a wider view from the south. Again, similar to as you were coming along, if you were standing directly in front of Thatches, that would be the view that you would see. Okay, so having gone through that and having regard to the history of the site and the images I've shown you regarding the materials, the one objection that remains that we haven't dealt with by way of condition is that the conservation team object in terms of the impact on the heritage assets. But given the location set back as originally intended and the varying scale, age and design evident in the vicinity, the dwelling is considered acceptable in terms of design and visual amenity, and there are considered to be no issues having regard to the earlier approvals that you've seen in terms of residential amenity when I discussed the position of habitable rooms and the location of the originally approved dwelling. Matters relating to flooding have been addressed, and the lead local flood authority have removed their objection and recommended conditions. There are no objections from HDC's arboricultural team, and any other outstanding matters can be addressed by way of condition. In terms of the impact on heritage assets, the main matter for consideration is the harm that the Conservation Officer has identified and whether there are any public benefits to outweigh the harm. Conservation have considered that the harm is less than substantial, but in this case, the public benefit appears to relate to the fact that this is an established and occupied dwelling, and it's for members to consider if there would be any public interest in the pursuit of further regularisation of this matter under planning enforcement. I would also like to point out, so members have got a clear understanding when they make this consideration, that the applicants would have a right of appeal against any refusal. And so the earlier matters that I've discussed regarding the history of the site and what's already been approved from the 2004 application and the certificate of lawfulness, along with the materials consideration, would also be matters to be considered and would be material in the outcome of the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will move on to our speakers. We have 5 speakers for this particular application. Our first speaker is Councillor Andrew Ford, who is representing Bythorn and Keystone Parish Council. Welcome. And when you're ready, you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee, and you can press the middle button. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Andrew Ford, addressing you this month in my capacity as Parish Councillor. We've watched with great concern this building being built and have reported on many occasions the breaches from agreed plans. We can't understand why no enforcement action has been taken from an early stage. On reading the officer's report, the Planning Department readily acknowledged they have made some serious errors. Once again, the planning officers have told us they are minded to agree with the parish council and reject the application, but for some reason this has now been approved. Another sudden and perverse decision. I can only conclude that the planning department are trying to justify previous planning mistakes. I would like to concentrate on just 3 main areas: flooding, materials, and the impact on the listed building, the Thatches. I would then like to make a proposal. Flooding. As I told you last month, Keystone went on to mains drains in 2020. This was after a 10-year campaign. Anglian Water finally accepted they had a statutory duty and installed the system as per their statutory obligations, and nothing more. Indeed, with military thoroughness, my colleague, Air Marshal Spink, asked what provision expansion was built into the system. Anglian Water responded there was no extra capacity, not even for one house to divert water into the sewer, as none was required by statutory requirement. We have been in further correspondence with Anglian Water as a result of this application and the diversion of service water into the sewer. Letters from them state, the connection should not be issued to the planning authority as a proof that a drainage strategy has been agreed by Anglian Water. But this is what has happened. This site has flooded 5 times in the last 25 years. Materials. It is farcical that the conservation officer was not even consulted over the materials. What part of conservation area and listed buildings allows for this? The conservation officer has now rightly objected. The irony is that the materials used are of a lower standard than the case officer mistakenly agreed. Impact on the thatchers. This is a listed building. Everyone accepts that harm has been done. There are no public benefits to outweigh the harm. The parish council does not accept the pharisaical argument about potential future legal costs. What about the potential future legal costs of the Ombudsman? The site of Full House is still listed by Historic England. Why hasn't this listing of the Full House site been even discussed in the report? Where is the view of the Specialist Conservation and Archaeological Advisor mentioned in section 5.2? This brings me on to the proposal.
Councillor Ford.
Yeah, I've just got 4 lines left.
Okay, thank you very much.
This brings me on to the proposal. The parish council are disappointed that there's been no further attempt at consultation with us about this building. We have some positive and pragmatic proposals whereby the situation could be resolved. Who knows, we might end up recommending a fresh application. I would therefore propose that the application is rejected, and we are very open to work together to resolve it. I would like to thank Councillor Gray for his continued support to reject, since we haven't heard from him, and also to the concerned villagers here this evening. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? Councillor Saunderson.
Councillor Ford, for coming to see us this evening. You said the parish council haven't been consulted, but from the report you've been consulted on at least 3 occasions?
Yes, but we haven't been asked what proposals we would make to allow the application to proceed.
Makes working. So I don't think that would be normal practice. I think you've obviously commented, you've objected to it, and that's one of the reasons why we're here tonight. So I think that process has been followed correctly.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for this particular speaker? There are no other questions, so thank you for addressing the committee. We will move on to our next speaker, which is Councillor Jonathan Gray, and we have a statement that will be read out from him.
Okay, so this is the statement by Councillor Jonathan Gray, the ward member. I apologise for not being able to be with you in person this evening due to holiday. However, I would like to make a written contribution, having been contacted by both the applicants and other constituents. Having been involved in this case for the past 3 years, I can state that this is the most distressing planning case I've been involved in over the 19 years I have been a councillor. As you have and will hear, it has put great personal strain on those from both sides of this case. I feel this all the more as the responsibility for this lies in very great part due to errors made by us as a planning authority over a sustained period of time. What is even more frustrating is that some of these mistakes have been made during the past 3 years, and they reveal that assurances and/or advice I was given by officers handling the case at that time were either not carried out or plain wrong. I have been contacted by the applicants who want me to highlight the very great personal stress they are under, having brought this property in good faith. Once I discovered the developer was marketing this, I asked that we place our dispute and enforcement work on the land registry records to protect any potential purchaser. This never happened. I asked for PD rights to be removed, which would have clearly helped in this case, which never happened. Whilst the applicants may have a case against their own conveyancing solicitors, that is not a position they should be in. And I have been contacted by other local residents and have in particular supported the residents of the Thatchers, a Grade 2 listed building that is now completely overshadowed by Full House. Their house reflects what should have happened. Use of materials and construction that reflects the conservation area they are in, as well as the historic nature of their house. Whilst they always knew an additional dwelling would be built, the size and scale of it are far greater than planned. Inappropriate for a conservation area or a building juxtaposed to their own. The use of standard materials simply compounds the injustice. The objection to this application by Conservation is telling. I cannot recall a DMC case I have been involved in where officers overrode their concerns. Indeed, very often they are produced as the trump card for a refusal. So I would urge the panel to question officers closely as to their reasoning of how the balance in favour of approval has been reached in this instance. Whatever the outcome, there are no winners here this evening, and it is an incredibly difficult decision the panel will need to make. It is clear to me that serious errors have been made by HDC in the handling of this case over more than 2 decades, and for that I wish to apologise to all concerned.
Thank you very much. We will move on to our next speaker, which is Mr. Lee Johnson and Mr. Peter Quamby. Thank you for joining us, and I believe you are sharing the 3 minutes between the two of you. So I believe you're having 2 minutes, and then Mr. Quamby's having a minute after you. So thank you very much, and please do address the committee.
Good evening. My name's Lee Johnston. I live at the Thatches. I'm speaking to you tonight to object to this application. Referring to Local Plan Policy LP34, the protection of heritage assets and their setting, Thatches dates back to the time of Oliver Cromwell, a Grade 2 listed building of timber frame and thatch construction within the conservation area, featuring prominently in the Keystone Character Statement, precisely the sort of important beneficial heritage asset that Policy LP34 is designed to protect. English Heritage were consulted and deferred their opinion to the Conservation Officer. The Conservation Officer recommends refusal. The recommendation from the Planning Officer to approve this application uses public benefit and the principle of encouraging development to override the Conservation Officer's recommendation. However, these principles were already achieved by the previous planning permission from 2004, which did have Conservation Officer approval and minimised the impact of the heritage assets. So what additional public benefit is now achieved from this larger new build? Adherence to Policy LP34 should not be selective. Approval of this application will be placing the perceived public benefit of the new build over and above the importance of protecting the heritage assets. Policies LP11 and LP12 require the consideration of design principles in a conservation area and the quality of a build. The National Planning Framework states that materials used must be sympathetic to local character and history. They are not. The materials actually used are not those approved in 2021, which did have regard to conservation area principles and now differ significantly. They are artificial in nature, they will not weather, and have not been referred to the Conservation Officer for approval. They have not been through the proper sign-off process. This is an important decision and sets out a precedent for future development in Keystone and within conservation areas across the district. The decision must be made on the balance and the basis of adherence to these policies and the reasoning on what is the just outcome here.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Civil Engineers, worked for the Environment Agency for over 20 years, including as Regional Flood Risk Manager. I'm astounded that HDC are prepared to go against national and Cambridgeshire planning policy and guidance for managing surface water. The proposal is for connection to the sewer, the worst solution for managing surface water and deemed unacceptable by many district councils. In 2005 and 2016, when a dwelling was approved, there was no foul sewer, and all of the neighbouring properties dispose of surface water through soakaways. Disposal through soakaway is the best solution and would have been the 2004 solution, contrary to the officer report in paras 734 and 735.
Thank you very much. Are there any particular questions for these particular speakers? Are there any questions? There are no questions. So thank you very much for addressing us today. We have another speaker on this particular application. We have Matthew Ellis and Jennifer Smith. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and you have 3 minutes into which you can address the committee.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Ellis, and my wife and I are the owners of Full House. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address the committee. The officer's thorough report comprehensively addresses the planning considerations, affirming that our applications merit approval on planning grounds alone. However, I would like to take this opportunity to briefly outline some of the background to these planning applications, which are also explained in the letter in the supplementary paper pack. We purchased the property in 2021 in good faith, having completed all the relevant steps through our solicitors in respect of the conveyancing process. When my wife and I purchased this property, we were oblivious to any potential planning discrepancies. Our searches returned no indications of any issues, and we embraced the prospect of a new chapter in our lives as we welcomed our newborn son. I implore you to understand the emotional and mental strain that we've endured over the past 2 years in grappling with this predicament, all while caring for our young child. The toll on our well-being and everyday existence has been profound. We've earnestly collaborated with all council officers and have done everything that has been asked of us, longing for this weight to be lifted off our shoulders. We've gone to considerable lengths and financial costs in providing solutions to any potential issues. The repercussions financially, emotionally, and physically have been constant. It is not just us who have felt the effect of this either. Our families have also suffered the worry alongside us. We have had to borrow money from our parents that was needed to deal with this situation. It's an understatement to say that this has consumed our lives for 2 years. Only a few weeks ago, we received the wonderful news that we're expecting our second child. As thrilled as we are of this news, the thought of the added stress from a rejection, coupled with the looming uncertainty as we proceed to an appeal, weighs heavily on us. I'm constantly plagued with the thoughts of the impact this could have on my wife's health and the well-being of our unborn child. I extend my gratitude for your consideration and ask the members of this committee to restore a semblance of normalcy and security to our lives and our home by aligning with the officer's recommendation and granting approval to our applications. With me, I have our planning consultant, Jennifer Smith, who can answer any technical questions on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this particular speaker or for the agent? There are no questions, so thank you very much for addressing us. We will move on to the next part of the meeting, which is to have, if any members have questions of clarification for our planning officer. Councillor Butler.
Yeah, just curious as to when the enforcement action began. Is that a recent event or?
Thank you. I'll be completely honest. I've not been involved with the enforcement route of things. I believe it was I can have a look and find out when that was. I believe it was something relatively recent because when the enforcement action took place and enforcement officers went to visit, it resulted in the invitation of the 2 applications that we've got on the agenda this evening in an attempt to regularise matters. So they came into us in 2022. So we're talking about in the last couple of years or so. But I can find that out for you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. As a point of clarification, members, you're here tonight to consider the applications in front of you. I'm afraid the planning enforcement history in itself doesn't have any bearing on your deliberations tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the flooding issues. We heard from the speakers, I think from Councillor Ford and one of the other speakers about their concern about the flooding. And I noticed from the report the County Council's Lead Flood Authority have removed their objection to this. But there was some question about whether there's capacity, questions regarding the connections and Anglian Water's involvement in this, but they seem to accept the plans as they are at the moment. So just wondered if you could just clarify that though, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Yes, so again, it's working on the basis that a single dwelling was approved there in 2004 or 2005 when the decision was issued. So, regardless of the plans that you see before you, there would have been a single dwelling there discharging into the sewer system. However the surface water was going to be disposed, the water was going to be
Please, can we have silence from the public gallery? Thank you.
So I was referring to the wastewater from the property as opposed to surface water. So an individual dwelling would have been there with the sewerage water from that property being discharged. The situation is here. Again, there was some consideration that perhaps the conditions had been discharged from the 2004 application, and I hadn't got a record of that. And also the fact that the certificate of lawful development that was issued in 2016 referenced that they considered that the conditions on the original permission didn't necessarily go to the heart of the permission. But notwithstanding that issue, we have gone to great lengths to have discussions with the lead local flood authority, and we have actually got Harry Pickford from the lead local flood authority available this evening to speak to us, and he will be able to address any technical matters if that would be helpful.
Councillor Niche.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. It's on the same vein actually. It was talking about the discharge of surface water. Is that something which obviously is a concern? Is that something we can condition in there? Is that something that's a requirement? And you talked about the gentleman online, which could probably advise us on that one, because I know across the district in general terms that's a major issue, and discharging into the public sewage system is the last resort if anything else can't be dealt with. So it's understanding why we couldn't go to that stage now. Were we minded to approve to put it as a condition? And the second one is really on the materials, because I know there's a thing about materials and whether with what would the conservation approve of from a material perspective. Probably a difficult question to answer, to make it more aesthetically pleasing or sympathetic, I think is the wording used. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Niche. So yes, I will refer to my colleague from the LLFA for detailed matters on the flooding matters. Regarding the materials, not being a conservation officer, it's very difficult for me to answer the question as to what they would expect. All I can say is that if, in terms of an application that I was looking at presently, having regard to the fact this was 2004, I'd be looking at putting a condition on there that asks for samples to be provided of certain materials, which then, of course, they submit to us and we can review and consider from there, if that helps. Thank you. If I can bring Harry in, thank you.
Good evening. Can I check that everyone can hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Excellent. Yeah, so regarding discharge of surface water from development, so it is a requirement to manage surface water and discharge it to a sort of suitable receptor. We do have to follow what is known as a drainage hierarchy, so that's kind of following what is the best point of discharge from site, and it follows a general hierarchy which starts off with rainwater reuse, follows to infiltration, into a watercourse, surface water sewer, and then as a last resort, we do look to kind of discharge water into foul sewer. Now, for this site itself, off initial kind of investigations, it appears that the site is underlain by clay, which kind of rules out infiltration due to the kind of permeability of the ground. It wouldn't be able to deal with the sort of water that we are looking to manage. The next option being the open watercourse adjacent to the site. This is outside of the ownership of Full House, and I believe that permission to discharge this would be required by the third-party landowner, which cannot be attained. In terms of surface water sewers, there are no surface water sewers in the area, so the only option that we have for the discharge of surface water is into that foul sewer, and they are limiting the discharge to kind of the lowest rate they can without increasing risk of blockage. So does that answer your question?
Councillor Niche.
Yeah, thank you. That goes towards it. Apart from just that explanation, is what you're saying is there is no way that they could build in something to reduce the amount of water, to capture that water, to reduce the amount that runs off because of the clay conditions. Is that what you're saying?
So they are capturing and holding some water on sites. That is the current proposals which have been put forward. So that they are looking to retain some of the water on site and discharge that at a lower rate into the foul sewer. So there is that kind of provision that is being provided under the current proposals.
It's fine. So from your perspective, this is the only option now from where it is to actually discharge into the sewer system.
It's the only acceptable point of discharge in line with the drainage hierarchy. Otherwise, there would be no point of discharge and water would just be left to sort of run off the site itself naturally, which isn't in line with kind of practices of surface water management. So yes, so this is the only option we have.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Niche. Are there any other questions of clarification for the planning officer? Okay, we'd just like to bring back in our planning officer to clarify a few points.
Thank you, Chair. So it was just to provide some clarification on the increased scale of the property. So this is detailed in quite explicit detail in section 7.8 of the officer report. But in terms of the height, as you saw, similar from the overlaid plans, the main section has an eaves height of approximately 4.3 metres, and as approved, it was 3.8 metres, and a ridge height of approximately 8.5 metres, and it was previously 8. So an increase of half a metre in terms of its height there. The remaining two sections in views from the front and rear have an eaves height of 4.3 metres, previously 3.5, and 2.9 metres, previously 1.7. And the ridge height, the point of abutment in the case of the mono-pitched element that you see to the north, of 7.8 metres, and it was previously 6.8 metres. And as I've discussed, I've gone through the increased footprint of the property under what's been, albeit completed without according with the originally approved plans, but with the permitted development rights there, the increased footprint could broadly take place without any requirement for planning permission. Thank you.
Are there any other questions before we move on to the discussion? There are no other questions, so we will move on to the discussion, and please ensure that you speak once unless there is something new that you wish to raise. Who would like to start the discussion for me? Councillor Sanderson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this is a very difficult one, isn't it? I mean, I have some sympathy with the comments Councillor Gray made about. I think he's been on the council 19 years, as he said, and it's a very difficult case. I'm talking perhaps more at the sort of human level here. That we've got a lovely village, and people are very passionate about where they live, of course, and the applicants who were not aware of potential enforcement action. But I think we have to leave that aside to some extent. I know the concerns. I asked Kevin earlier about the flood issues, but the county council have actually withdrawn their objection to this. And I think thanks to Councillor Niche's questioning, we did get some comprehensive answers around that. I do have a lot of sympathy with the resident at Full House who I was there earlier today with Councillor McAdam. Lovely property, and I think he put his case quite coherently. But my feeling here is with the previous permission granted and the issues that relating to flooding, which I think have been summarised quite well. I'm looking for reasons to object to this. I think the conservation team's comments, though, are quite relevant, and it is very unusual that we will go against some advice that we've had from our own conservation team. I just wonder if we could just have perhaps an explanation of how we got to that point, perhaps a little bit more, just before we move on. But I'm finding it difficult to reach the balance here. I'm inclined at the moment to go with the recommendation for approval, but I'd like to hear some of the other arguments as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sanderson. Kevin, would you like to answer that for us, please? Thank you.
Thank you to Councillor Sanderson. Yes, so consultees such as conservation, they provide us with advice on applications, but ultimately, as the decision makers, we make the final recommendation. So, in terms of how we've come to that conclusion, I think, as referenced in the officer report, it's very much a case of previous planning decisions are a material planning consideration when you're making a recommendation on an application. So I go back to the history of the site and what's happened in terms of the original approval in 2005 and the certificate of lawfulness we issued in 2016, even down to the materials that you've seen, and that again a material planning consideration because it's part of the planning history of the site. So it comes down to trying to identify the public benefits, and I've put that across in the officer report as clearly as possible. But ultimately, it does come down to the fact, although I have regard to their objection, as officers, we are the decision makers. And of course, when it comes to committee, it is delegated to members. Thank you.
Thank you, and to you, Chair, if I just may add, obviously our specialists are very knowledgeable in their field. They're not obliged to have the same regard to the planning history in the way the planning officer has in coming at their balanced recommendation. And while, as Kevin rightly points out, we always have regard to what they say, the obligation to consider the planning history is incumbent on the case officer, not necessarily on the specialists themselves. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any others that wish to contribute to this discussion? Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite in agreement with Councillor Sanderson on this one. It's a really difficult one because I think if this was before us as a complete fresh application, we'd have a completely different outlook from it. But because there's already permitted, agreed to an extent, agreed aspect that a property can be built there, I think we would really struggle in lots of areas if we would turn around and say, no, we object to this, whatever you do, pull it down or whatever. And I think that would be, we would really struggle because it would go to appeal, and that's not a reason for us not to go against it. Equally, when we talked about the surface water one, which again concerned me, but we've had an expert there give us the hierarchy, and quite rightly, the last thing you want to do is discharge into a sewer. But as he said, that is the only achievable way of dealing with it, and they are obtaining some of it, retaining some of the surface water on sites. I would have a bit of concern about whether we allow, because obviously we've seen permitted development rights would allow, if that house had been built, to still build that extension. So I'd say that if we were minded to approve it, we'd look at what permitted development rights should be or shouldn't be allowed for future. The materials is an interesting one because I must admit I did go past it about 3 times before I realised which one it was. But I was wearing a helmet at the time. It's not always easy to see out the side when in the car. I've gone off. I've spoken too long, and I did actually walk down and have a look, and I wasn't accosted, but apologies to anybody whose areas I'd walked across, but I did actually wander down. And I'd say some of the materials, I think, yeah, in today's, we'd probably look at it and say, no, let maybe look at something different, but it's there. And I don't think it looks horrendous, in my own view. I think it looks reasonable. So would I actually sit here and say, actually, I don't approve it? I'm still really balanced, and I can't see any real strong arguments to actually go against the officer's recommendation at the moment. But I do agree, as Councillor Sanderson, it's been a real difficulty on this one from both sides, from all sides. I think it's a wary note to all of us when buying property to make sure you have a solicitor that might look a bit deeper than maybe some others, but that's not planning. Sorry, I digress. So yeah, I'm open to listen to others, but at the moment I'm minded, to verge on the side of the approval with the planning officer, but would be welcome to hear any other thoughts from other fellow councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you, Chair. I'm certainly struggling with this one. I take a modest amount of reassurance on that account from having heard the comments from Councillor Gray and Councillors Sanderson and Niche before me. In underlining the difficulty of this one, I think what is absolutely crystal clear, as Councillor Niche alluded to, I think quite clearly, if we were starting from fresh and there was an application for the property in its current form, in its current location, we wouldn't even be here at DMC. I think it's clear that it wouldn't even have got that far. But we aren't considering that application from fresh. We're considering it as it stands with the complex history that's been set out. And complex is a euphemism for clearly a deeply unsatisfactory history here, as we've heard acknowledged on all sides. And the timing around enforcement is clearly exacerbating the frustrations that all will share on this, regardless of the fact, as has rightly been pointed out, that's not a material consideration for us in any case this evening. But I think it does speak to the charged context. It is not clear to me that there, that we could debate this all evening, and that a clear, easy answer will arise from what's set out here. I have to say I do sympathise with the observations Councillor Sanderson and Niche have made this evening. I think in the context, justifying other than accepting the proposal with fingers on noses, perhaps, I think is difficult to see how we could successfully defend. I'm particularly sympathetic to the comments set out by the conservation officer here, and we've rightly been steered by our planning officers as to the narrower focus of the remit given to the specialists to comment. So I don't think I have any great enlightenment to share with colleagues beyond what Councillor Sanderson and Niche have already addressed. But I'm certainly not feeling that I've heard a justification we could sustain to go against the officer recommendation here, despite the clear strength of feeling on both sides on that one. So I will leave it there, Chair, and listen to further contributions.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors that wish to contribute to this discussion? Councillor Goulson.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as we know, we're here to make a decision on what's in front of us, but it's for another time. We need to just go through. I would have liked to have seen a timeline of what's gone on, but that's not what we're here for doing. But I think there's a learning to go back to all departments later on, because on this one, whatever and however we take a decision on this, we don't come smelling of roses at all as a whole. There are quite a lot of aspects on this one. There's the heartfelt one from the family. There's also the villagers and how they are impacted accordingly. But as is said, we have to just go on what is in front of us on this application. It's one that I feel that whatever we do, whatever and however we say, it's not a good representation of how I see HDC planning have been. And so I think we just need to really mull through this one a bit further.
Are there any other councillors that wish to contribute to this discussion? So those of you that have spoken, are any of you minded to make a proposal? Councillor Wakeford?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to go where you were suggesting there. Clearly, we need a next step in debate. I am reminded, recapping my notes from discussion, that I was remiss in my earlier contribution. If you'll forgive me, in just underlining gratitude to the officer team, as we now have in seeking to plot a path through this that we can defend. I know there was a suggestion earlier that there was a motivation of trying to justify previous mistakes. I do just want to underline, I don't think that's fair or accept that, and I have no doubts as to the good faith of officers this evening. I think there is openness as to the litany of mistakes on this one that we've heard. So I did just want to underline that. I can't see a less worse option than to propose acceptance of the recommendation on the paper this evening, Chair. So I will do that.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. Councillor Brereton?
Thank you, Chair. I will second Councillor Wakeford's proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Brereton. Councillor Nish, were you going to do that?
It's just about condition of permitted developments as to whether we would consider removal of permitted development, and I'm not quite sure of when that should come in, because obviously as it might be one which might need to go in before with the proposal, but I'll bow to greater knowledge on that one, Chair.
Okay. My planning officers, can you just clarify that, because I believe it is in the pack?
Certainly, thank you, Councillor Nish. Yes, so the one of the conditions in the event of an approval would be the removal of certain permitted development rights under Schedule 2, Part 1, classes AA. Sorry, my system's just closed on me. I do apologise. B and C, and Schedule 2, Part 2, classes A and C of the permitted development order. So that would basically limit further extension of the property and further alterations and certain things that could. It wouldn't be correct to limit all permitted development rights, because there are some aspects that would be acceptable, but certainly those are the things that we would look at as standard, and the things that could be considered as to cause them the most harm in the event of them being allowed under PD. That helps.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Chair, and I thank Kevin for his, was always, clarity in the whole explanation of things.
Thank you very much. So we've had a recommendation for approval from Councillor Wakeford and seconded by Councillor Brereton. All those in favour of approval, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
And those against?
None.
Those abstentions?
There's 2.
So that has now been approved. We will just have a quick break for 5 minutes, and then we will come back. brought to our attention that item 4B on our agenda has been withdrawn by the applicant, by the agent. So I put it to the committee that we do not make a decision on this particular application tonight. That's yes. So I've just explained to the members that that has now been withdrawn. Well, it depends on the decision. So I put that to the members that it has been withdrawn. Are we looking to not make a decision on this particular application as it has been withdrawn from the applicant? All those who are happy to not determine this particular application, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Therefore, the application has been withdrawn from the agenda. And we will move on to item 5 on our agenda, which is the appeals decision. And we will have a report from our planning service manager. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. 4 appeals this month. One of the appeals was allowed. That's a prior approval application where the inspector took a different view in terms of the alterations to the building, of whether or not they were reasonable within the explanation of prior approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of our agenda. So thank you very much to everyone that contributed to this discussions, and thank you very much to our planning officers who put in so much hard work in writing these reports. Thank you and good night.